Valeri was not like the humans she was sent to observe. As an officer from the Zarian species, she was designed to be emotionless. Her race was created for one purpose: to serve and protect their civilization with pure logic. There were no feelings, no personal desires. Everything was calculated. Everything had a purpose. The Zarians believed that emotions were a weakness, something that clouded judgment and disrupted efficiency. In her training, Valeri had been taught to eliminate any sign of emotion, to remain detached from the world around her. She had mastered this discipline, excelling in her work. But now, here she was, standing in the middle of Earth's science facility, her mission to observe and report back to her superiors. When she first arrived, the humans around her stared with a mixture of curiosity and awe. After all, she was an alien, and her appearance was unlike anything they had ever seen before. Her skin was a pale blue, tinged with a purplish hue, and her ears were small and delicate, much like those of the humans, but with a faintly pointed curve. Her eyes, though, were the most striking, a deep silver that seemed to reflect the cold light of the stars. Valeri wasn't here to socialize. She wasn't here to make friends. She was a soldier, and her mission was to gather data on human behavior. She had been assigned to monitor their emotional responses to different stimuli, to understand how they interacted, and to report her findings back to the Zarian Empire. Nothing more. As she walked through the facility, her sharp eyes caught every detail. The way the humans interacted with each other, the smiles, the laughter, the way they touched one another with casual ease. None of it made sense to her. These emotions, these strange feelings they displayed, seemed so unnecessary. But one human caught her attention. His name was Liam, a volunteer at the science facility who worked with the alien researchers. He was unlike the others. While most humans tried to keep their distance, wary of her presence, Liam was different. He wasn't afraid. And more than that, he seemed curious. She first noticed him when he walked up to her, a warm smile on his face. "Hi there," Liam said, extending his hand. "I'm Liam. You're the alien they brought in for the studies, right?" Valeri looked at his outstretched hand, unsure of what to do. She had been taught never to make physical contact unless it was necessary for her work, but Liam's smile was inviting, almost like he wanted to be friends. She gave a small nod, acknowledging him, but didn't return the gesture. Instead, she simply said, "Yes, I am Valeri. I have been assigned to observe." Liam's smile didn't falter. He didn't seem fazed by her blunt, emotionless response. Instead, he chuckled lightly. "Well, if you need a tour or anything, I'd be happy to show you around. We have a great view of the city from the rooftop, and I think you might like it." She wasn't sure how to respond. She had no interest in the view of a human city, but there was something about Liam's offer that seemed genuine. "I am not here for sightseeing," she said, her voice flat, controlled. "I have a mission: to observe." Liam didn't seem put off. "Fair enough," he said, his tone warm but not challenging. "If you change your mind, you know where to find me." As he turned to walk away, Valeri found herself watching him. There was something strange about him. He wasn't afraid of her. In fact, he seemed completely unbothered by her alien presence. That was unusual. Most humans kept their distance, uncertain of what to make of her. The next few days followed the same pattern. Valeri would observe the humans, taking notes on their behaviors, while Liam would pop in now and then, offering small talk or making jokes. She found herself analyzing his every word, every glance, trying to decipher what made him so different from the others. He would sometimes bring her food, offering it without hesitation, as though the act of sharing was a normal human exchange. "Have you ever tried Earth food?" Liam asked one day, pushing a plate of strange-looking fruit toward her. Valeri eyed the colorful assortment. She had been trained to avoid anything that wasn't scientifically approved for consumption. But something in Liam's eyes made her hesitate. He wasn't asking her to eat it because it was necessary. He wasn't trying to use it as a tool to gather information. It was just a simple, kind gesture. "No," Valerie replied cautiously. "I have never felt the need." Liam smiled, as though he didn't mind her answer. "You're missing out. But I understand. A lot of Earth customs are hard to get used to, but you'll be fine. I can show you around. I know all the best spots." Valerie looked at him for a moment. There was a strange warmth in his eyes, a warmth that she couldn't understand. "I don't need a tour," she said, but her voice wasn't as cold as it had been before. There was a slight pause as she watched Liam's face fall, just a little. "I'm sorry," she added quickly, though she didn't know why. "Perhaps later." And that was the first time Valerie had felt a flicker of something she couldn't define. The days passed, and Valerie continued her observations, but it was becoming harder to ignore the way Liam's presence affected her. His kindness, his laughter, his curiosity, all of it was starting to make her feel something. But what? She didn't know. It wasn't logical. It wasn't efficient. It wasn't her. But every time she saw him, that feeling grew stronger, and Valerie found herself wondering, could there be more to these humans than she had been taught? Days turned into weeks, and Valerie found herself in a routine that she hadn't expected. Every morning, she would observe the humans at the science facility. She took notes on their behavior, their interactions, their emotional responses to various situations. It was fascinating, yet, at the same time, perplexing. How could these creatures display such varied emotions? How could their laughter, sadness, or even anger shape their actions? But one thing was certain: Liam was a constant. He always appeared at the facility with a smile, asking if she needed anything or simply making small talk to ease the awkwardness. He didn't seem to care that she was an alien or that she was cold and calculating. For the first time in her life, Valerie was unsure of herself. She watched him from a distance, noting how he interacted with the other humans. He was friendly and open, always offering help and striking up conversations with anyone around him. But when he spoke to her, it was different. There was no fear, no hesitation. He was simply kind. One day, as Valerie sat in the observation room, taking notes on a group of humans discussing their plans for the evening, she felt a tap on her shoulder. Startled, she turned to find Liam standing behind her, holding a cup of what appeared to be some kind of warm drink. "Hey, I thought you might want some coffee," Liam said, offering her the cup with a friendly grin. Valerie stared at the cup for a long moment. In her training, she had been told never to accept anything from humans unless it was directly related to her mission. But this was different. Liam was offering something small, a gesture of kindness. She couldn't help but feel a strange pull toward him. "Why would you offer me this?" she asked, her voice flat, but not as cold as it had been before. Liam shrugged. "Just wanted to. I'm sure you've got a lot on your mind. Everyone could use a break sometimes." His words confused her. Humans were always offering things to one another: food, drinks, time. But it was never about necessity. It was about connection. Valerie didn't understand how they could form such bonds so easily. "I don't require a break," she replied, her voice still emotionless. But as she spoke, she realized how untrue her words sounded. She had never felt the need for a break before, but now, there was a strange emptiness inside her. Liam's eyes softened, and for a brief moment, he didn't seem like the playful human who teased her with jokes and offers of coffee. Instead, he looked at her with something else: concern. "Everyone needs a break, Valerie," he said gently. "Even you. You've been working nonstop. Maybe just relax for a moment. No reports, no analysis, just you." Valerie hesitated. What was this feeling? Was it discomfort? She had never been asked to relax. Her entire life had been about control, about efficiency. But here was a human asking her to simply be, to stop analyzing, to stop thinking. The thought was strange. "I do not know how to," she started, but her words faltered. She had no idea how to simply be. It had never been part of her training. Yet the idea of just sitting with Liam, sharing a moment without the weight of her mission, made something stir within her. Liam smiled, as if he understood her hesitation. "You don't have to figure it out right away. Take your time." As he turned to leave, Valerie found herself watching him. She didn't want to admit it, but something inside her longed to take that coffee, to sit beside him, to just be. But instead, she watched him walk away, the emptiness inside her growing a little more. The next few days were filled with internal conflict. Valerie's observations of the humans were more fragmented now. Her mind often wandered, focusing on Liam instead of the data she was supposed to be collecting. She couldn't understand why she was becoming so distracted. It didn't make sense. Emotions had no place in her world, and yet every time she saw Liam, she felt something that she couldn't quite define. One afternoon, she found herself walking down a corridor when she unexpectedly bumped into Liam. He was carrying a stack of papers, and as they collided, some of them scattered across the floor. "Oh, sorry about that," Liam said quickly, crouching down to help her gather the papers. Valerie, for the first time, felt an odd sense of urgency to help him. She bent down to pick up the papers as well, their hands brushing briefly. She froze, staring at him. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. "I'm sorry," she said, looking away quickly. Why was her heart beating faster? Why had that simple touch made her feel strange? Liam smiled, completely unaware of the turmoil she was experiencing. "It's fine. Happens all the time. You should try not to get too lost in your thoughts, though. There's a whole world out here to experience." The way he said it, so casually, as if experiencing the world was something everyone could do, made her feel something she couldn't explain. She wanted to experience it too, but she wasn't sure how. She had never been taught how to feel, how to let go of the tight control she had always lived with. "I will try," she said quietly. Liam stood up, offering her the stack of papers. "Maybe when you're done with your work, we can grab a coffee. I'll even let you pick the place." Valerie nodded, but in truth, she didn't know how to respond. She had no experience with casual human interactions like this, but she couldn't deny that the idea of spending time with him, of being around him without the weight of her mission, felt right. As Liam walked away, Valerie stood there for a moment, lost in thought. She had never allowed herself to think about emotions, but now something was stirring within her, something that was both terrifying and strangely comforting. Maybe Liam was right. Maybe there was more to this life than just logic and duty. And maybe, just maybe, it was time for her to find out. Valerie's mind had become a battlefield. On one hand, her mission was clear: to observe, to gather data, and to report back to the Zarian Empire. But on the other hand, something was changing inside her. She found herself questioning everything she had been taught. Emotions, once dismissed as weaknesses, were now something she couldn't ignore. And it was all because of Liam. She didn't know what to do with the strange feelings stirring within her. Confusion, uncertainty, and something else. Something deeper were growing in her chest. The Zarian way had always been simple: logic, order, control. But now, for the first time in her life, Valerie was feeling lost. Her superiors would never understand this. They would never accept what was happening to her. So she kept her thoughts to herself. She focused on her work, even though it felt less important every day. The humans around her were all too emotional, too unpredictable. But Liam, he was different. He made her feel something that was difficult to define. Determined to make sense of these emotions, Valerie decided to use her training. She would conduct a psychological study, just as she had been trained to do. She would focus on human emotions, using Liam as her subject. Maybe by observing him closely, by understanding how he processed his feelings, she could make sense of her own. The following day, Valerie approached Liam, who was in the cafeteria, chatting with a few other humans. She took a deep breath before walking over to him. He looked up, his face lighting up with his usual warm smile. "Hey, Valerie. How's it going?" Liam greeted her cheerfully. "I need your help," Valerie said, her voice steady but uncertain. "I'm conducting a psychological study on human emotional behavior. I would like you to answer a few questions." Liam raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued but not hesitant. "Sure, no problem. What do you want to know?" Valerie sat down across from him, carefully observing his every movement. She had studied humans before, but this would be different. This time, she wasn't just observing from a distance. She was going to dive deeper into the human mind and into her own. First, Valerie began. "How do you define love?" Liam seemed to consider the question for a moment before answering. "That's a big question, huh?" he said with a small laugh. "I think love is when you care about someone so much that their happiness becomes just as important as your own. It's not always easy, but it's real. And it's worth it." Valerie nodded, processing his words. She had read about love in the reports and data logs, but hearing it from Liam was different. His words carried warmth, something she hadn't expected. "What about fear?" Valerie continued, her voice steady. "What makes you afraid?" Liam leaned back, his eyes reflecting a more serious tone. "Fear, I guess, is when you feel like you're losing control over something important. Losing someone you care about, or facing something that feels bigger than you. It's a feeling that can stop you from doing what you need to do, but it can also push you to take action. It's strange, but it's part of being human." Valerie's thoughts raced. Fear, love. She had never experienced these emotions, but hearing Liam's descriptions made her feel something. It was as if she were starting to understand him, to see him as more than just a subject for observation. "Do you ever feel lonely?" she asked, her voice softer now. Liam's expression softened, and for a brief moment, he looked away, as though gathering his thoughts. "Yeah, sometimes. It's part of being human. We're social creatures, so when we're alone, it's hard. But loneliness doesn't always last. There are people around you who care. You just have to let them in." Valerie's heart skipped a beat. The idea of loneliness, of feeling disconnected, was something she couldn't quite grasp. She had never been taught to rely on others. She was always independent, always self-sufficient. But now, the thought of being alone, truly alone, seemed unbearable. "I see," Valerie murmured, trying to control her emotions. "One last question. What do you think is the most important thing in life?" Liam smiled, his eyes brightening with conviction. "For me, it's about finding meaning. Whether it's in relationships, your work, or your passions, having something that makes you feel alive is what matters. Without that, what's the point?" Valerie sat back, her mind racing. These answers, simple as they were, seemed to open a door to a world she had never known. It was a world filled with uncertainty, but also with connection. The idea of love, of fear, of loneliness, these were things she had only ever read about. Now she was beginning to experience them. But what did this mean for her? For her mission, she was supposed to be observing, not feeling. She was supposed to remain detached. But the more she spent time with Liam, the more she felt like she was losing that control. Her heart raced when he was near. She couldn't explain it, and that scared her. "Thank you, Liam," Valerie said, standing up to leave. "Your answers have been helpful." Liam nodded, his smile warm and sincere. "Anytime, Valerie. Anytime." As she walked away, Valerie's mind swirled with questions she didn't have answers to. She had studied emotions her whole life, but it was only now, through Liam's words, that she was beginning to understand. The problem was, she didn't know what to do with the feelings that were now surfacing. How could she reconcile what she was learning with everything she had been taught? What would happen if she allowed herself to feel more? The answers were still unclear. But for the first time, Valerie was starting to wonder if maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than logic. Valerie's world had become increasingly difficult to navigate. She was no longer simply observing. She was feeling, and the feelings, though strange and unfamiliar, were undeniable. The more time she spent with Liam, the more she questioned everything she had known. Could emotions, despite what the Zarians believed, actually be a strength? Could they make her better, more human? But there was no time to dwell on these thoughts. Her mission had not changed. She was still tasked with observing the humans, and her report to the Zarian Empire was due soon. The pressure was mounting. The logical side of her demanded that she focus on the task at hand, but the emotional side of her, the part of her that had been slowly awakened by Liam's presence, resisted. One afternoon, as Valerie was going through her notes in the observation room, an emergency alert sounded throughout the facility. It was loud and urgent, sending a ripple of tension through the air. Valerie stood up immediately, her instincts as a trained officer kicking in. She quickly accessed the facility's control panel, her fingers moving quickly over the buttons. "Report," she commanded, her voice as calm and controlled as ever. The screen in front of her flickered to life, showing the security officer's face. He was breathing heavily, his face pale with fear. "Valerie, you need to get to the lower levels. There's a breach in the security system. We don't know how, but someone, or something, has gotten past the shields. It's not human. It's dangerous." Valerie's heart skipped a beat. She had never been one to react with fear, but something about the officer's voice made her uneasy. "What kind of threat are we dealing with?" she asked, her voice steady, but her mind racing. The officer was cut off by a loud crash, followed by the sound of something large moving quickly through the hallways. There was a scream, then silence. The screen went blank. Valerie's pulse quickened. She couldn't afford to waste any more time. She ran down the hallway, her footsteps echoing in the empty corridors. As she reached the security checkpoint, she was greeted by a chaos she had never imagined. The humans were running in every direction, shouting, panic evident in their voices. In the middle of the chaos stood Liam, his face contorted with fear. He was looking around desperately, trying to figure out what was happening. When he saw Valerie, his eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment, everything else faded away. "Valerie," he shouted, his voice shaky. "What's going on? What's happening?" She ran over to him, grabbing him by the arm. "Stay close," she said, her voice firm but tinged with something she hadn't felt before. Concern. "Who's behind this? What's out there?" Liam asked, looking around nervously. "I don't know," Valerie admitted, "but we need to move quickly." Without another word, Valerie grabbed Liam's hand, pulling him through the facility. They rushed down a narrow hallway, the sound of footsteps pounding behind them. Valerie's mind was racing. She had been trained to handle threats, alien invasions, intergalactic warfare, diplomatic crises. But this felt different. It felt more personal, more real. As they reached the lower levels, the air grew colder and the lights flickered. Valerie could hear the sounds of something moving in the shadows. Large, heavy footsteps, scraping against the metal floors. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. "What is that?" Liam whispered, his voice barely audible. Valerie turned to face him, her eyes steely. "I don't know, but we need to stay quiet. Stay close." They continued moving, each step filled with tension. Valerie's heart was pounding in her chest, but she pushed the feeling aside. She had to focus. She had to protect Liam. Her mission was to observe, but in this moment, something deeper had taken over. She would protect him no matter what. As they rounded a corner, they saw the source of the noise. It was a creature, massive and alien in appearance, with sharp claws and glowing eyes. It moved with terrifying speed, its body covered in dark, armored plates. The creature sniffed the air, its eyes narrowing as it locked onto Valerie and Liam. Liam froze, his face pale with fear. But Valerie didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, her hand reaching for the blaster at her side. "Stay behind me," she ordered, her voice calm and steady, despite the rush of emotions inside her. The creature growled, its eyes glowing brightly in the dim light. It lunged toward them, but Valerie was faster. She fired her blaster, the beam hitting the creature square in the chest. It let out a deafening roar, but it didn't fall. Instead, it snarled and began charging toward them, faster than before. Valerie fired again, but the creature was too fast. It swiped at her with its massive claws, sending her crashing into the wall. Pain shot through her body, but she pushed it aside, standing back up. "Liam," Valerie shouted, "get to the control room. Now." Liam hesitated, looking at her with wide eyes. But Valerie didn't wait for him to argue. She fired one last shot at the creature, stunning it momentarily, before pushing Liam toward the hallway. "Go," she ordered. Liam nodded, fear evident in his eyes. "I'll be back. Stay safe." Valerie watched as Liam ran down the hall, his figure disappearing into the distance. Her focus shifted back to the creature. It was angry now, but she wasn't afraid. The Zarians had taught her not to fear danger. And right now, she wasn't just fighting to complete her mission. She was fighting for Liam. She knew that whatever happened next, she would protect him. She would protect the humans. Because, for the first time, she understood what it meant to care. The sound of footsteps echoed in the empty hallways as Valerie moved quickly, keeping her senses alert. Her mission was clear: get Liam to safety and neutralize the threat. But the pain in her side from the creature's claws was starting to slow her down. She had to focus. She couldn't afford to be distracted. The creature was still out there, hunting, and the facility was in chaos. She had made sure Liam was headed toward the control room. Now, it was her turn to finish what had been started. But as she pushed through the pain, something began to stir deep within her. A feeling she hadn't quite recognized before, but now couldn't ignore. It was a strange mix of confusion, worry, and something else. Something like fear. Fear wasn't something Valerie had ever known. Her race was designed to be immune to it. But the truth was becoming clearer every second. She was beginning to care about something more than her mission. She cared about Liam. She cared about protecting him, even at the cost of her own safety. She continued moving forward, her mind swirling with questions. Why was she feeling this way? Why couldn't she focus? These weren't thoughts she was supposed to have. She had trained for years to be emotionless, to rely solely on logic. But now, that training felt like a distant memory. Finally, she reached the security hub of the facility, where the main control systems were housed. The area was locked down, the thick steel doors making it impossible for anyone to get through without the correct clearance. But Valerie didn't hesitate. Her Zarian training kicked in, and she used her advanced skills to override the system, unlocking the doors in seconds. The control room was silent, except for the soft hum of the computers and the faint beeping of alarms still ringing throughout the facility. As Valerie stepped inside, she quickly took a seat at the central terminal and began to assess the situation. The breach was worse than she had expected. Several systems had been compromised, and there was no way to stop the intruder without shutting down the entire facility. But then her thoughts turned to Liam. Had he made it to safety? Was he okay? Her hand hovered over the console, a strange feeling gnawing at her insides. She shouldn't have cared. But for the first time, Valerie felt the need to protect something more than just her mission. She needed to know Liam was safe. Just as she was about to send a signal to Liam, her communication console blinked to life. It was a direct message from the Zarian command center. "Valerie." The voice on the other end was sharp and commanding. "Status report. What is the situation?" Valerie's heart skipped a beat, but her training took over. She kept her voice steady. "The security breach has been contained. The creature is neutralized. I've secured the control room." There was a long pause on the other end, and then the voice spoke again. "We've detected irregular activity in your biological systems. Your vitals are fluctuating. Are you experiencing any issues? Valerie froze. Her mind raced as she tried to process the question. Her system wasn't supposed to fail. The Zarians had made sure of that. She was designed to be perfect, emotionless, and efficient. But now she was starting to feel something. No, she answered quickly, her voice betraying her with a slight crack. I'm fine. No issues. But even as she spoke, she felt it. The pull of something deeper, something beyond her control. The emotions she had denied for so long were becoming impossible to ignore. They were starting to overwhelm her, to affect her thoughts and actions in ways she couldn't explain. The voice on the other end was unconvinced. Valerie, you need to report back to the ship immediately. We've detected a system anomaly in your biological functions. You're being compromised. You are instructed to return for recalibration. Valerie's heart pounded in her chest. Return for recalibration. The very thought of it made her stomach turn. She had been trained to be perfect, to remain detached and emotionless. The idea of being reset felt like a loss of her identity, a denial of everything she had become in the past few days. No, Valerie said, her voice firm despite the turmoil inside her. I am not returning. I am staying here. There was a silence on the other end. The voice seemed to hesitate before responding. Valerie, you are in violation of Zarian protocol. You must return immediately or face consequences. Valerie's fingers trembled as they hovered over the console. The control room, once a place of cold logic, now felt like a prison. The Zarian Empire had never allowed for emotions. They had never allowed for weakness. But now, it was clear to Valerie that what she was feeling wasn't weakness. It was humanity. And she wasn't willing to lose it. I will not comply, Valerie said softly but firmly. She disconnected the communication, cutting off the voice from the Zarian command center. For the first time, she felt free. As the weight of the decision settled over her, Valerie took a deep breath, trying to focus. She knew what she had to do. Her mission had shifted. It was no longer about just observing. It was about choosing her own path. But there was still one more thing she had to do. She had to find Liam. She had to make sure he was safe. Valerie stood up, her legs feeling shaky, but determined. She couldn't let the fear of failure stop her now. She had discovered something in herself that was far stronger than any protocol or rule the Zarians had ever imposed on her. She cared. And that was something the Empire could never take away. With one final glance at the control room, she set her mind on the next steps. No more hesitation. No more logic. She was going to find Liam. Valerie's footsteps echoed in the empty hallways as she made her way through the facility. The pain from her previous injuries had dulled, but a new, more intense feeling lingered in the pit of her stomach. It was a feeling she didn't know how to describe. A mixture of uncertainty, worry, and something more. As she walked, her mind kept returning to the same thought. Liam. She had cut off communication with the Zarian command center. They had ordered her to return for recalibration, but she couldn't bring herself to do it. She had already started to feel something beyond the cold, controlled existence she had known. Emotions. They were unpredictable, illogical, and everything she had been taught to suppress. Yet, for the first time, she didn't want to suppress them. Her training had taught her to ignore everything that didn't serve her mission. But as the days passed, Valerie realized that she was no longer just following orders. She was beginning to care. The feeling she had for Liam, the warmth of his smile, his kindness, his unwavering trust in her, those feelings had taken root inside her and were growing stronger with every moment she spent in his presence. Valerie reached the lab where she had last seen Liam. She hesitated at the door, her hand hovering above the handle. What if she was making a mistake? What if her emotions were just a distraction, a weakness that would ultimately get them both killed? She pushed the door open. Liam was standing by a workstation, his back turned. When he heard the door open, he turned, his face lighting up in relief when he saw her. Valerie, you're okay, he said, his voice filled with genuine concern. "I'm fine," she said, stepping into the room. She tried to keep her voice steady, but she couldn't help the slight tremor in her words. "I didn't expect to find you here." "I wasn't going anywhere," Liam replied with a small smile. "I couldn't leave you alone after what happened." Valerie felt a rush of warmth at his words. It was an unexpected feeling, one that left her uncertain of how to respond. She had been trained to keep her emotions in check, to stay focused on the task at hand. But in that moment, standing in front of Liam, it felt impossible to ignore the connection between them. "I've made a decision," Valerie said, her voice firm. "I can't go back to the Zarians. I can't let them reset me. I need to learn. I need to understand what this feeling is." Liam's expression softened as he stepped closer to her. "You don't have to do this alone," he said quietly. "I'll help you. You don't have to hide from your feelings. They make you who you are." The words hung in the air, and Valerie felt her heart race. For the first time in her life, she realized that emotions were not something to be feared or controlled. They were part of being alive, part of what made her human, even if she was far from human herself. "I don't know how to feel," she admitted, the vulnerability in her voice surprising her. "I was never taught how. I've always been trained to avoid it." Liam gently placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch warm and reassuring. "It's okay. I don't have all the answers either. But together, we can figure this out. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be yourself." Valerie took a deep breath, the weight of his words sinking in. She had spent so much of her life focusing on control, on logic. But now, she was beginning to understand that the heart, the emotions, were just as important as the mind. They didn't have to be a weakness. They could be a strength. "I want to understand," Valerie said, her voice steady now. "I want to understand what it means to care for someone, to feel love." Liam smiled, his eyes warm. "It's not always easy, but it's real. Love is messy. It's complicated, but it's worth it. You'll see." For the first time, Valerie felt a sense of peace. She had been running from her emotions for so long, but now she was ready to face them. And in doing so, she realized that she wasn't alone. She had Liam by her side. Over the next few days, Valerie and Liam spent time together, talking, learning from each other. Valerie found herself laughing more often, feeling things she had never thought possible. It was overwhelming at times, but it was also beautiful. She was beginning to see the world through different eyes. She still had much to learn, and the road ahead would not be easy. But with Liam's help, Valerie was starting to understand the one thing she had never been taught: how to live as a person, not just a soldier. She was learning to feel, to experience the full range of human emotions, and in doing so, she was beginning to discover her true self. One evening, as they sat together watching the stars outside, Liam turned to her with a serious expression. "Valerie," he said softly, "I've been thinking. What are you going to do now?" Valerie gazed out at the stars, her mind focused on the future. She had spent so much time following orders, living in the shadow of the Zarian Empire. But now, she realized she had the power to choose her own path. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "But I do know one thing. I won't be controlled anymore. I'll make my own decisions based on what I feel. And right now, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Liam smiled, and for a moment, everything else faded away. The stars, the planet, the galaxy, they all seemed distant. In that moment, it was just the two of them, and that was all that mattered. Valerie had started as an emotionless soldier, detached from everything. But now, with Liam by her side, she was becoming something new, something human. The days that followed felt like a strange new beginning for Valerie. She had never allowed herself to feel anything before, but now, with each passing day, emotions were becoming a part of who she was. She was learning, slowly but surely, that feelings weren't something to fear. They weren't a weakness to be suppressed. They were a part of what made her whole. The facility was still on edge after the recent breach, but things were beginning to settle. The intruder had been neutralized, and the humans were returning to their routines. Valerie had stayed by Liam's side, helping him with the aftermath, and in the quiet moments between work, they found comfort in each other's company. But despite the calm on the outside, something inside Valerie still felt unsettled. She wasn't sure what the future held for her. She had turned her back on the Zarian Empire, and though she didn't regret it, the uncertainty of her decision weighed on her mind. She couldn't ignore the fact that she was no longer just an observer, no longer a soldier. She had chosen a new path, a path where emotions, feelings, and connections mattered. One evening, as Valerie walked down the corridor to meet Liam, she felt the familiar warmth inside her chest. She had come to appreciate these quiet moments with him, when they could just talk, laugh, and be together. But tonight, she knew something was different. Tonight, she needed to say what had been on her mind for days. Liam was standing near the window, looking out at the stars. The soft light from the console illuminated his face, casting gentle shadows across his features. He looked at peace, but there was something in his eyes that made Valerie pause. She hesitated before approaching him, her heart beating faster than it had ever been. She had learned to control her emotions, to keep them buried, but now she realized that hiding them wasn't the answer. She couldn't ignore the truth any longer. "Liam," she said softly, her voice a little shakier than usual. Liam turned to her, his eyes lighting up at the sound of her voice. "Hey, Valerie," he said, a smile spreading across his face. "What's on your mind?" Valerie took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "I've been thinking a lot lately, about everything that's happened, about how much I changed. I didn't realize how much I had been missing, how much I was afraid of, feeling." Liam's smile faded slightly, but there was no hint of judgment in his eyes. He stepped closer to her, his expression soft and understanding. "You don't have to be afraid anymore, Valerie. You've come a long way. It's okay to feel. You don't have to be perfect." Valerie nodded slowly. She had spent so much of her life thinking that perfection meant control, that keeping her emotions in check was the only way to survive. But now she understood that real strength came from allowing herself to feel, to be vulnerable. "Liam," she continued, her voice quiet but clear, "there's something I need to say. I've been afraid to admit it, even to myself, but I can't deny it anymore." Liam's expression softened, and he took a step closer. "You can tell me anything, Valerie." For a moment, Valerie felt the weight of her own hesitation. What if saying the words out loud made them too real? What if she couldn't take them back? But the thought of losing the connection they had, of letting fear stop her from speaking her truth, felt even worse. "I care about you, Liam," Valerie said, her words coming out more easily than she had expected. "More than I've ever cared about anyone. And it's not just because you've been kind to me. It's because you've made me feel things I didn't even know were possible." Liam's eyes widened slightly, and for a moment, he was silent. Valerie held her breath, waiting for his response. She didn't know what to expect. She had never been in this position before, and the uncertainty was almost overwhelming. Finally, Liam spoke, his voice soft but full of warmth. "I care about you too, Valerie, more than I thought I could. You're not just some alien soldier to me. You're everything. And I've never been more sure of that." A wave of relief washed over Valerie, and she felt her heart lighten. For the first time, she realized that saying what she had been afraid to say didn't make her weak. It made her stronger. It made her more human. And in that moment, she knew that whatever came next, she would face it with Liam by her side. "I didn't expect any of this," Valerie said, her voice full of wonder. "I didn't expect to feel anything. But you've shown me that it's okay to let go of the things I've been holding onto for so long." Liam reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "You're not alone in this, Valerie. We'll figure it out together." For the first time in her life, Valerie felt a deep sense of peace settle within her. She had always been taught to live without emotions, to be cold, distant, and controlled. But now, with Liam's hand in hers, and the knowledge that she was no longer alone in her journey, she felt something far stronger: love. As they stood there, hand in hand, staring out at the stars, Valerie realized that she had finally found something worth fighting for. Not just her mission, not just survival, but something far more meaningful, something that made her feel truly alive. The future was uncertain, and there were still many challenges ahead. But for the first time, Valerie was ready to face whatever came next. With Liam by her side, she knew that anything was possible.